It all started on a sunny day in River City. Misako was getting ready for school and see her best friend Kyoko. It was a typical normal day, even way before Kunio and Ricky got kidnapped. Before Misako went to school, she saw her neighbor and waved at her. She slowly waved back and then continued on her way to school. When Misako got to school, her health class was talking about relationships. Her teacher showed a video about a story of a kid's parents who got divorced. The video also showed the kid wasn't close with his mom anymore, as she has gone absolutely psycho after her new boyfriend went missing. Misako just assumed that he probably just wasn't interested in the mother anymore and went on the run. She even remembered that her neighbor had the exact same family problem, because she wondered why did the dad look so familiar, but she later on forgot about it. When Misako was heading home, she suddenly saw a bunch of tree branches formed into weird shape and formation, almost like some kind of stick figure. If I could explain it to you guys, I would describe it as one of those stick figure symbols that you would see in those ABCs of Death movies. They were literally scattered everywhere, on the street, on the sidewalk, by the window, in people's houses, on the trees, on the grass. Misako even saw a public sign that was vandalized with the same symbol. She just assumed that it was probably just a bunch of trollmakers trying to scare people out of the neighborhood. Misako later got home and chatted with Kyoko about the usual stuff, like Kunio and Ricky, school, Hasabe and Mommy, personal problems, the girl kind of stuff. Later that night, Misako was trying to sleep in her bed, but for some reason, Misako had trouble sleeping in this particular night. Then she suddenly heard someone running on the sidewalk across from her house. It kind of left Misako paranoid and a bit ready to fight, because she thought that someone was creeping outside her house. But then she convinced herself that it was probably just a bunch of squirrels scattering around the sidewalk, road, and grass. A couple of seconds later, Misako started to hear laughing from a distance. It couldn't have been from anyone in her family because they were all sleeping in their beds. So either someone was outside of her house, or it was just a figment of Misako's imagination. Then she held her breath and listened closely. Misako, 100%, heard the laughing coming from somewhere a bit far from her house. It sounded like a bunch of insane grown-up drunks causing a big disturbance. At this point, Misako's curiosity got the best of her, so she got out of bed and left the house and started following the sounds. She didn't want to wake anyone else in her family up, so she went outside to explore by herself. Misako started walking through the neighborhood, and she could hear the laughing. It became more creepy and clear. At that point, Misako never felt so nervous in her life. Her dread and worry was making her blood turn into ice in fear as she got a bit closer. Misako could see a light from a far distance. She cautiously and quietly got a little closer. Misako came close to an abandoned place where the light was coming from. and saw one of the most disturbing things she's ever seen. The lights turned out to be a bunch of lit-up torches. Masako saw a group of men and women dressed up in what looked like doctor and surgeon outfits. Some of them had surgeon masks, while some of them had stethoscopes around their neck. There were like 24 of them, and they all looked like they were surrounding 2 people. Or something like that. The 2 people that were surrounded was a woman and a young-looking boy. They looked like they were a mother and son or something. And they also looked like that they have been captive for years. Masako saw one of the doctors put a surgeon mask on the woman and a gauze bandage over the boy's mouth. Another doctor started raising a big syringe in the air. She then started chanting something. And it sounded like this. "Be gone, little devils. You don't belong in this earth anymore. It's time to end your existence and bring peace and love to the earth once and for all." It looked like the doctors were performing some kind of messed up ritual. What the female doctor did next still haunts Masako whenever it came to her mind. She then stabbed the syringe into the woman's chest and then into the boy's mouth, and then used a bone saw to cut off the woman and boy's heads, and took out both of their hearts right after. As soon as she did that, all of the doctors began cheering and laughing like lunatics. Masako was absolutely terrified of what she was seeing, and started to fear for her, Kyoko, and their boyfriends' lives. As Masako was about to run out of there, she saw a glimpse of one of the doctors holding a drill. His face looked hauntingly familiar. Even with the surgeon mask on, Masako could easily tell it was her neighbor. Masako was completely terrified and ran back to her house. As she arrived back home, she could see a silhouette of her neighbor sleeping in his room. Masako was confused and terrified at the same time. "I could have sworn I saw my neighbor dressed up as a surgeon," she said as she went into her neighbor's house. She went into his bedroom and found out that the silhouette was actually a dummy. She then put the dummy back and went back to her house, and back to her room, and back in bed to pretend she's asleep. 1 hour later, she heard her neighbor running back to his house, and allegedly threw the dummy outside somewhere in his yard. The next day, Masako saw her neighbor on her way to school, and she acted like nothing just happened, and went to school with Kyoko. Ever since that day, Masako never looked at her neighbor the same way anymore. She just pretends that everything is normal. She now understands her neighbor's true colors and personality. Masako believed that the ABCs of Death stick figures resembled the bodies that have been killed each year. And she had a strange feeling in her gut that the 2 victims she saw last night was her neighbor's wife and his son. Masako now knows that her neighbor is part of a cult.